The topic we are discussing today is transgender. Some people think that a man, even though he's a man, could be a woman. Other people think that a woman, even though she might not identify as a woman and thinks she's a man, can, in fact, be a man. But as we're going to see in this video, that's just not true. We can't change our sex. We can't change our gender. It's not fluid, and it's not something possible biologically that we can change. And we're going to talk about that in 1 second.
I very much doubt that. After all, as I demonstrated in my last video, you have a very lacking understanding of the subject. Something you are further grounded in your strawman notion of what a trans person is. A trans person is not someone who believes they can change their sex and gender. They're someone who comes out about the fact that they were assigned the wrong sex and gender at birth. In my last video, I went into a discussion about the different sexual characteristics. I discussed how gender identity could very easily be included as the psychological element of sex. I also demonstrated numerous other places where you've been actively dishonest, either knowingly stating falsehoods or lying about having done the most basic research. It's one or the other. Anyway, let's see what you have to say on the topic of proving I don't exist.
My name is Brian Mercier. I'm the president and founder of Catholic Truth. It's an organization dedicated to the truth of God, the Catholic faith, and life and living. And in this video series, we are talking about transgender. This is the second of a 3-part series on transgender. And in the next video, the final video, we're going to be talking about intersex, or commonly known as hermaphrodites. But in this one, we're talking about transgender specifically in the sense that, is it possible that if a man thinks he's a woman, is he really a woman? And if a woman thinks she's a man, is she really a man, or is it just something that she thinks in her mind? That's what we're talking about. Some people are saying today that gender is fluid, that you can change gender, you can change your sex, you can change a lot of things about yourself, including things that, well, forever weren't biologically possible to change. Now people are saying there's many different genders. I mean, if you ask somebody how many genders are there, some people today will say, we don't know. There's just so many, and there's more genders coming out every single day. Because what people say is that there is a spectrum. Some people are male, some people are female, and some people are in between. Or you may be born a woman, but in your mind, it's telling you you're a male, and therefore you are. And nobody considers the fact that our minds lie to us all the time. Nobody considers the fact that it might not be correct in our mind, in that there might be a different problem. It's kind of like 1 + 1 is 2. 1 + 1 has always been 2. That's what math tells us. And in fact, some people might think that 1 + 1 is 3. Now, just because somebody thinks in their mind that 1 + 1 is 3, they're not bad people. They're just mistaken. But let's say that you can't convince them, and they are 100% convinced in their mind that it's 3. Okay, fine. You know, they're still wonderful people. God still loves them, but it doesn't mean that it's 3. So you're free to believe that it's 3. The problem comes in when you start telling other people that they also need to believe that 1 + 1 is 3. And that maybe even we start trying to change laws and turn over all of Western civilization to show that 1 + 1 is 3, despite what all of mathematics says now and has always shown. So if you want to believe it's 3, great, go ahead. But don't tell others that it is when it's not. We've known forever that a male is a male and a female is a female. That's something that can't change. That is biology. And we've known that forever.
First of all, the British and the American medical communities spent decades operating under the assumption that being transgender was a mental illness. So this claim that nobody has considered this is flat out false. This was the dominating perspective during the early years of the fields of psychology and sociology. Only as the fields have been refined and the poison of your religion drawn out, has that consensus shifted to one based on evidence. Though this is not the first time. Magnus Hirschfeld, founder of the 1919 Institut for Sexualwissenschaft, aka the Institute for Sex Research in Germany, supported trans people as the gender they were. Sadly, their research was destroyed when the Nazis rose to power for being at odds with their Christian sense of morality. Said institute is where a large number of the books and documents seen in the photographs of book burnings came from. Of course, they didn't burn the list of the institute service users, Instead, they used them to round up said people and send them off to the concentration camps to die slow and painful deaths. When the Allies reached these camps, they of course set everyone free. Everyone, that is, that wasn't marked with a pink triangle, the symbol used to denote trans, gay, or bisexual people. Many of them were incarcerated after the war. It's one of our greatest shames. As for the idea that it erases Western culture, again, historically false. There's a reason Rome had to outlaw the very existence of trans people during its Christianization with the writing of the Theodosian Code. Reminder that the Romans were actually Western. Christianity, meanwhile, is Middle Eastern. Fact is, there are other cultures out there, as noted in my previous video, and many of them acknowledge the existence of other genders. In my last video I discussed the South Americas and the Hijra community of India. But in the North Americas, we also have the Cree, the Lakota and the Zuni people who acknowledged and revered people that have more recently come to be known by the title Two-Spirit. Of course, when Native American children were taken and placed in Christian schools, they were taught to hate aspects of their own cultures, including their acceptance of trans people and the different genders they recognized. And similar things take place down in Australia with the stolen generations. Said horrific practice involves taking pale or half-caste native children and placing them in Christian missionaries, government-run orphanages, or European households. They're then raised with no connection to their roots as part of an attempt to Christianize them. Amongst the culture they're torn away from, as with some North American tribes, is an understanding of gender very different to the one Christianity imposed upon Europe. I actually had the immense privilege of studying my Race and Racism module at Surrey alongside an Aboriginal trans man whose grandmother had been one of the children taken from her family. Thankfully, they'd been reintegrated into their culture. However, whilst the most blatant aspects of the practice ended in the 60s and 70s, he was keen to acknowledge the fact that Australian Aboriginals are disproportionately targeted by the law, and that includes having their children taken away from them. Back to the point at hand, the existence of trans people does not go against what we've always known, does not go against Western culture, and even if it did, Western culture is not the only culture of importance. The truth, however, is that it goes against Christianity, a religion which teaches that the sky is a solid dome and that snakes can talk.
Just because somebody feels a little bit more effeminate, it doesn't make them a woman or a girl. Just because a woman has a little more testosterone or maybe is a tomboy, that doesn't make her a man. She's still a woman. A man who, let's say, loses his private part, that doesn't make him a woman. Just because he doesn't have that part, it doesn't make him a woman. Our biology tells us who we are. We know that a male is a male because of his chromosomes and because of his body parts and because of his bone density, his brain, and many other things right down to the cellular level. I mean, these things make a male a male. So even if somebody thinks in their mind that they're a female, it's just not true. Because a lot of times, our minds, they lie to us. In fact, our minds do this all the time and we don't even realize it. In fact, in body integrity disorder, it's kind of a body dysphoria where a person actually thinks that their limbs or one of their limbs, like an arm or a leg, actually belongs to someone else and it somehow got on to their body. This is a sort of dysphoria in which scientists actually tell us that the brain is fooling us. It's actually, in a sense, lying to us, science says, because we think that our own arm belongs to someone else. And we're so convinced about it 100% that we actually want the arm amputated. These people don't want these arms or legs on their bodies anymore, and they want them amputated. In like manner, another body dysphoria is anorexia, where the mind fools us and lies to us again. People who could be stick thin, anorexic, actually believe that they are overweight. They actually believe that they're fat. And when they look in the mirror, even though everybody else in the world sees them as skinny and maybe too skinny, they still see themselves as fat because their minds are lying to them. It's the same thing in gender dysphoria. A lot of our minds are lying to us. We're being told perhaps that as a male, I don't feel like a male, I feel like a woman. And in this culture, if you're even a little bit off, people are saying, oh, you're not a real man. Oh, you're not a real woman, even though you are.
First of all, shut the fuck up. You don't get to run through a list of randomly scientifically recognized psychological conditions, dishonestly refer to them as a dysphoria, and pretend like they're the same as gender dysphoria. Because think about what you're saying here. You're saying that the professionals who study the subjects listed and have reached the conclusion that they're not the same are wrong, and that you're right because, well, no evidence is given. All you are doing is using mental health as a means to attack trans people, attempting to gaslight us to spare your religiously accepted ignorance at the cost of our lives. Now, that's not just transphobic, that's ableist. So, you're a bigot on two accounts here. As for the statement that feeling slightly feminine doesn't make you a woman and that feeling slightly masculine doesn't make you a man, well, no shit. Nobody has stated otherwise. Men and women have the widest range of expression in Europe that they've had since Christianity infected everything. So again, you ignore the evidence since it completely invalidates your bigoted spiel. Being trans has nothing to do with your clothing or interest. It has to do with one thing and one thing only: your gender identity. That is the long and short of it. Though, I do find it incredibly interesting that you acknowledge the brain as a component of sex, yet you think the mind has no relation to it. Like, where do you think the mind resides? Well, from the quality of the content you put out, I guess yours might reside somewhere closer to your rear end. But for the rest of us, the mind is a product of the brain. Ergo, gender identity is the psychological element of sex, and said element need not impact any other aspect of the mind, just that one core aspect, that intrinsic sense of identity.
And so if we are men and if we are women and that can't change because of biology, then why do we have this movement of people saying that it can change? And where did that come from? Not too long ago, about 50 years ago, three men, Alfred Kinsey, John Money, and Harry Benjamin, they had no degrees in endocrinology and they had no degrees in science or anything related. And they, with no authority, just struck this disorder, gender identity disorder, from the books, and they were the ones to change what gender and sex actually mean, and they were the ones to create the word transgender and make gender a social construct, meaning something of your environment or something of a product around you and all that sort of thing. This can make you one way or this can make you another way. It's fluid. These men were the ones who created this, and they changed it without any authority to do so.
Harry Benjamin earned his degree in medical science in 1912 from the University of Tübingen, Germany. He would go on to become an endocrinologist in the United States. Alfred Kinsey earned his degrees in biology and psychology in 1916 from Bowdoin College in the United States. This is all the most basic stuff you should have found out with any research. They also didn't invent the word transgender. David Oliver Caldwell is often credited with introducing the word transsexual into the English language in 1949, a derivative of Magnus Hirschfeld's outdated label, transvestite. This word was then adopted by Harry Benjamin. The word transgender, meanwhile, is credited to John Oliver in his 1965 work, Sexual Hygiene and Pathology. As for John Money was a vile man who attempted to show that conversion therapy, identical to that used by Christians today, could be used to force intersex individuals to align their gender with however parents or doctors wanted them to. I did a video detailing their crimes and how their views do not align with the dominant trans perspective, which is that of affirmative care. As noted time and time again in my last video, most trans people do not believe we have the capacity to change a person's gender, whether it be our own or the gender of others. That's the bastards who seek to convert trans people, changing them from transgender to cisgender. People like yourself. But considering that the last of these people, John Money, died in 2006, I fail to see how they tyrannically force the publishers of the DSM-5 to declassify gender identity disorder as a mental disorder in 2013. Because that's when we gained gender dysphoria to describe the distress felt by trans people when their gender is suppressed, whether by themselves to hide or deny who they are, or by larger society in attempts to change them, Gender dysphoria is not the essence of being trans, though it is a common experience that is typically only seen in this one community. The one exception that comes to mind is David Reimer, who, whilst they identified as a boy, as they were assigned at birth, was forced into playing the part of a girl by John Money to try and prove that you can change a child's gender. Reimer, who had his penis irreparably damaged due to a botched circumcision as an infant and was forced to present as a girl, developed gender dysphoria like that we see in trans people, the result of which was a sad and broken life which inevitably resulted in them taking their own life. All because John Money refused to listen to David and let him live as the boy he knew he was. That's why John Money's approach was not affirmative care. He did not listen to the child, he attempted to force the child to adhere to what he believed they should be. Just like you. Thus refuting the idea that trans people are changing anything about themselves. Because, think about it. If it were possible to simply identify as the opposite gender, and that were the case with trans people, wouldn't that have happened with David Reimer? But it didn't. Instead, he developed gender dysphoria, which tore his life apart, in the same way it tears apart the lives of trans people, forced to deny who they are.
Now, this is very dangerous thinking, because once we start thinking that we're not who we are, then that's a problem. I mean, we actually do, in more extreme cases, we have people thinking in this country that they're Jesus or that they're Cleopatra from a past life. And we have people who have some disorders up here, and we don't encourage that. We don't promote that because we want to help the person. In fact, I heard one speaker who said that his uncle is a schizophrenic, and he actually thinks that the refrigerator and the toaster are talking to him. Now, what if we said, you know what, if he really thinks it's talking to them, then that's okay. It's really talking to them. And you know what? He's going to believe and go with what he identifies with and what he thinks is true. That's his reality. We shouldn't tell him that. No, of course not. They gave him the help he needed, and he got the medications he needed, and now he lives a mostly normal life because he got the help and his mind was not lying to him anymore. And that's good. That's what we want. We want to help people. We want to help the problem. We don't want to lie to people at the cost of saying, oh, well, it's mean to say this, or you're not being nice, or we need to be tolerant. But if someone thinks the refrigerator is speaking to them, that's not tolerant. That's abuse if you actually go along with their delusion. And you're not actually helping the person to get better. And when we start saying that a boy can be a girl and a girl can be a boy and we can change sex and gender, it just doesn't work. And a whole host of problems and stories and confusion come from this.
Well, perhaps you could overcome your clear confusion by actually studying the topic, rather than rambling off on any relevant tangent. Because all you have are stories which, let's be honest, let's say that they were people who claimed they were trans and turned out not to be trans, that would mean nothing for every other trans person out there. Meanwhile, in the previous video, I demonstrated that affirmative care, accepting a trans person for who they are, is the only, I repeat, only ethical course of action. Yet I must say, I keep being astonished by the way you pretend to care about science and the very examples you use to try and validate your point. Why is someone claiming to be the Son of God today any more ridiculous now than it was 2,000 years ago? Why is a talking toaster or fridge more ridiculous than, say, a talking bush or donkey? It's amazing how, when we take a step back and see what you're saying here as a means to try and invalidate trans people, just how much better it works on invalidating your entire religion. Because, once again, we return to the following question. Why do you, a person with no demonstrable knowledge relating to the topic of trans people, believe you know better than the biologists and psychologists who have reached an evidence-based consensus that trans people exist and that being trans is not a mental disorder? Also, I'm still waiting on evidence that trans people don't exist, since the stories you tell certainly don't offer that.
Here's just a few stories to make the point. Everybody knows Ben Shapiro. He talks on this subject a lot, and he was in a debate with a girl, and he asked the girl, how old are you? And the girl said, 22 years old. What, are you going to tell me I'm dumb because I'm so young? He said, no, quite the contrary. You're 22. Why aren't you 60? And the girl was like, well, she went to speak, but she couldn't, because she knew she wasn't 60. Even if she thought she was 60, in reality, she's 22. See, here's the thing, he said. He said, you can't magically change your age, you can't magically change your gender, and you can't magically change your sex. He said these things are biological and they're ingrained in us. Even if you think you're 60, it doesn't mean you are. I believe in my last video, I mentioned a man, a grown man, I think he was around 50 years old or so, who actually thought he was a 6-year-old. He actually thought he was a kid and got surgery to reflect that and to feel like a little girl. Now, of course, this poor man, he's not a little girl and he needs psychological help. And for people to endorse that is not tolerance, it's mean. It's mean not to give people the help they need. Likewise, I saw another conversation of a man who was talking to a college student, and he got to the point where the kid said you can be basically whatever you want. And the host said, okay, well, what if someone identified as a cat? What if a human being identified as a cat? And he thought about it for a second and he said, well, then they're a cat. And I hope they're the best cat on planet Earth. More power to them. They're a cat. Now, at this point, it's crazy. Like, our education systems have failed us. If we think that a human being can be a cat or a dog or a reptile or anything else than other than what we are, even though we have eyes and we can see clearly, our school systems have failed us. A college-aged kid believing that a human being can be a real animal, instead of maybe they have psychological problems and need help. There are thousands of medications on the market today for the thousands of disorders that are going on in millions of people's minds. I mean, this isn't just one thing. As I said, body integrity disorder, anorexia, gender dysphoria, or transgender. I mean, there's a lot of different things, but it doesn't make them true.
I agree, the educational system has failed us. Namely because scientifically illiterate hacks like yourself believe yourself to be capable of lecturing the scientific community on what they should and should not think. None of what you listed has any relevance to the topic of being transgender. Gender is not interchangeable with age and species here any more than it was when discussing marriage equality. I'm also intimately familiar with the Shapiro clip you're referencing, it being one of Stephen Woodford's personal highlights, in spite of the fact that it's a total fucking train wreck. Ultimately, this is a different form of the dead I identify as an attack helicopter meme. It reveals nothing on the topic being discussed besides a complete lack of understanding on your behalf. So, if that was your goal here, well done. Goal achieved.
Another story that I thought was interesting was that there was a news article which said man gives birth to a baby. First man to give birth. Now, this was a woman who thinks she was a man, so she had a sex surgery and she made herself a man, but in reality she had already gotten pregnant. As a woman who thought she was a man, she gave birth. So a man didn't actually give birth, and do you know why? Because men don't give birth. It's biologically impossible for a man to have a baby 150,000%, which is why, and in fact it proves that this transgender movement is not true, because a man can't have a baby. So to call this woman a man and say that he had a baby, it's factually incorrect. It's not true.
Except it is true because it has happened. Your only argument here is to ignore the scientific consensus and assert without basis that a trans man isn't a man. Thing is, I would be interested to get your thoughts on the fact that people with XY chromosomes can give birth to multiple, perfectly healthy children without medical intervention. There have been multiple cases of this occurring throughout history, and in the case I'm referencing below, I believe the individual self-identifies as a woman as she'd been assigned at birth. But I wonder whether you'd consider her a man or a woman since she has XY chromosomes, but is capable of giving birth. If she's a woman, then you can't use chromosomes to exclude trans men from manhood. Therefore, trans men can give birth to their children. If she's a man, then that very clearly invalidates the assertion that men cannot give birth. So, either way, your position collapses.
In fact, I've heard of couples, married couples with kids, unfortunately, who suddenly identify as the opposite sex, and they have sex surgeries to match that and to reflect what they think they are, and the wife becomes the husband, and the husband becomes the wife, the woman becomes the man, and the man becomes the woman, and they stay married with their kids, and my gosh, that is so confusing for these poor little kids. Of course, the kids themselves are probably less confused than the parents. The parents are very confused and need help. You can't change your sex, and you can't change your gender. That's just not how it works.
I've never actually heard of a case where both parents came out as transgender. I mean, it's theoretically possible, I just haven't seen one. As for the confusion children apparently suffer, this is the same rubbish as that we've been told for generations surrounding same-gender couples. It lacks any and all basis. What actually causes confusion is a lack of education. Education like that which the Catholic Church openly attacked in the document you are defending. So, if you want to reduce confusion amongst children, first you must address the Catholic Church's anti-educational stance. As for parents who come out as trans, yes, it's tragic, but not for the reasons you forward. It's tragic that said person has had to hide who they are for their entire life out of fear of rejection and social hostility. And it's more tragic when their other half can't accept them for who they are. But what's not tragic is the fact that said person has taken the first step towards living as themselves, something which has demonstrable benefits as evidenced in my previous response.
And if you look at our culture today, we have boys who are becoming girls and joining the girls' track teams and swimming and lacrosse and everything else, and they're destroying all the girls around them. And what comes to mind first and foremost is the MMA, the Ultimate Fighting Championships, where a man didn't tell anyone and he became a woman and he went into the women's league and fought women. And he beat the ever-living daylights out of 2 women. And in the final match, he actually beat this poor woman so bad that he crushed her skull in, and she needed reconstructive surgery just to continue going on. This poor woman got beat by a man. In daily life, we are trying to say that violence against women is wrong, but anyone who promotes this and says it's okay for a man to be a woman and beat up a woman, even though he's a man, we're promoting violence against women, and it's wrong.
Fallon Fox came out as transgender publicly in 2013. Their match with Tamika Brents took place in 2017. So once again, we find that you're lying about what actually occurred to try and make it seem like there's some sort of devious agenda behind everything. And whilst her skull was hardly crushed, Brents did suffer an orbital bone fracture. MMA is a combat sport. So how common are head injuries in MMA? Well, a study of 455 MMA competitors from Seoul Metropolitan City and Gyeongbuk Province of Korea tallied a total of 831 separate injuries, of which 118 or 14.2% were located on the head. So to ignore the fact that such injuries occur all the time in MMA, regardless of trans participation, to focus on a single instance in which a trans woman injured a cis woman is selective to the point of actively dishonest. But I feel like you've gone full Noel Plum by this point, which, even for a Catholic, is pretty damn low. Trans women are not dominating women's sports. There are a handful of success stories which have been sensationalized and even outright lied about, like by you, to try and present trans women as a threat to cis women when the evidence does not back that up. It's also pretty sick to watch you attempt to leverage gendered violence as if it had any relevance to the topic. Fun fact you seem to be pretty unaware of: it's illegal to randomly hit somebody, no matter their gender. That's called assault. Also, your assertion here is dependent on the claim that trans women are men, which you've done absolutely nothing to show in this video. Because reminder, this video was supposed to be a demonstration that shows transgender people don't exist. Not once in this entire video have you even attempted to actually do that. All you've done is go, I don't understand, here's a random anecdote I've lied about, trans women are men and trans men are women. None of which is an actual argument that demonstrates anything beyond your clear hatred of trans people and a disregard for the science and ethics of the subject. I can just as easily flip your sick narrative back on you, pointing out the facts that you want trans women, who science tells us are women, to fight cis men. So if anyone is encouraging violence against women, it is yourself. Fact is, there are mixed gender martial arts out there, and you don't seem to be crying over them. Only when it can be used as a bludgeon to harm trans people does it suddenly become so important. I'd also like to take this opportunity to give you a quick reminder that sports like these are divided into weight classes. This class system accounts for height as well as bone and muscle mass. That's why trans men such as Patricio Manuel, who is only 5'6", can still win in boxing because he's pitted against cis men of similar size and build, just like trans women will be pitted against cis women of similar size and build.
Science tells us that people who suffer from transgender, actually 30% of them suffer from some sort of dissociation disorder in their minds.
So what? They're a heavily abused demographic with little to no pre-existing support structures. Dissociative disorders arise as an unhealthy coping mechanism for trauma. If a trans person constantly faces abuse from people like you because of who they are, dissociation is very likely to form as a survival strategy. So you take the consequences of your actions, the suffering you inflict on trans people, and argue that is evidence that you are justified in your abuse. That's just fucking abysmal. Then again, it's all too common. The same thing happened with homosexuality and the spread of STIs. Religiously motivated bigots targeted gay and bisexual people, made stable relationships impossible, and blocked comprehensive sex education. Naturally, when STIs began to spread in the communities you targeted, you turned around and used said effects to claim that same-gender attraction was unnatural, when all that really showed us is that if you collectively target a demographic, bad things happen. And that's on you.
This has got so extreme that one man himself had 167 sex changes. He went in for 167 sex surgeries. I mean, it's out of control. This, again, not to be mean, but this is not transgender. This has nothing to do with gender itself. It has to do with identity, and it's a disorder. This man has clear mental issues, and to say anything else, it's not helping him. It's hurting him, and it's stunting him, probably for life. And on the extreme side of this, you have people who are identifying as cats and dogs and even reptiles, and they're getting surgeries to reflect this. It's really sad. And the Catholic Church is not making fun of these people. The Catholic Church loves these people, and so does God. God wants a relationship with each and every one of these people, so we're not putting the people down. We're not saying they're bad, looking down on them or trying to bully them in any way. We're actually trying to help them. I think the people who are looking down on them are the fundamentalist activists who are attacking the Catholic Church and who are giving in to their illusions. Those are the people who are doing the real damage to these people, which is why some people like Walter Heyer, who had 3 sex changes before he realized that he actually is a man and he can't change his biology, and he is the author of IRegretMySexChange.org, people who actually have regretted their sex change and kind of share their story. You can see that it's not a transgender issue. It's a gender identity issue. And many times, this is what leads to the high suicide rate of 40% of transgender people. So I'm not for putting these people down. We shouldn't discriminate against them, but we should help them, and we should tell them the truth, that a man is a man and a woman is a woman, and we need to come to grips with who we are as God made us, and we want to fix the problem.
Well, you could always bite down on that lying tongue of yours. The fact is that the science has shown us that people like Brian Mercier are the very ones responsible for such high levels of attempted suicide, so I don't feel much compassion towards them. Now, I've already discussed these facts with references to peer-reviewed journal articles in my previous video, but let's have a quick reminder. Attempts to convince someone to change their sexuality or gender almost triples their attempted suicide from 8% to 23%. Putting them through so-called conversion therapy further increases that attempted suicide up to 42%. The science also shows us that children accepted for the gender they are have rates of anxiety and depression, elements responsible for attempted suicide, equivalent to general society. So if you actually gave a damn about trans people, you'd shut your dishonest mouth, actually research the subject, and stop spreading hatefully misinformed anti-trans propaganda. You are a transphobic bigot. The Catholic Church is a hate group. You don't get to redefine your atrocities as care, no matter how much you wish you could. Mercier has nothing of value to say on the matter beyond asserting his piss-ignorant opinion. He's got no evidence, no understanding, but he believes he can lecture people that do have an understanding. Brian Mercier is a damn good example of the Dunning-Kruger effect in action. As always, please check out our other videos. You can also support Essence of Thought via Patreon, and in doing so, help us become ad-free. We'd just like to say a big thank you to everyone who's already given to the channel, giving a special thanks to the following people: Hannah Banghart, Matthew Kovac, McGay, Amit Devojny, Erica Ann James, Daniel Martinez, Steve Corbin, Zam Braxton, Caleb Smart, Wellington Marcus, and Atlas5. And for myself and Adita, take care now.